It's Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. You're a Navy cook at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and the sky fills with planes. 350 of them, red circles on the wings. At this exact moment, 5,000 miles away in Washington, two Japanese diplomats are sitting in the US State Department, smiling, officially still negotiating peace. The note that breaks off those negotiations lands on the Secretary of State's desk 1 hour after the bombs. Japan has just attacked a country it was shaking hands with. And the truly insane part is that nothing about this was improvised. This exact move had been rehearsed, polished, and perfected for over 1,000 years. This is the story of the most dangerous handshake in history. Japan starts out as a place you could walk to. During the Ice Age, the sea was low enough that hunters strolled over from mainland Asia like it was nothing. Then the glaciers melted, the water rose, and everyone standing on the wrong side of the new ocean was now permanently on an island chain. Door closed. No one's going anywhere for a while. The people stuck there did fine, honestly. 10,000 years of fishing, acorns, and making some of the oldest pottery on Earth. No kings, no recorded wars. 10,000 years of vibes. Then new settlers start arriving by way of Korea, and they bring rice. And rice ruins everything, because rice can be stored, and anything that can be stored can be stolen. And now the islands have politics. Within a few centuries, Japan is 100 tiny kingdoms all robbing each other. One of those tiny kings is so thirsty for status that he mails tribute to the Emperor of China and receives back a solid gold seal declaring him a king. We still have that seal. A farmer dug it out of a ditch 17 centuries later. He was fixing his irrigation and pulled out the receipt for Japan's first diplomatic relationship. The first ruler of Japan we know by name isn't a warlord, by the way. She's a shaman queen named Himiko, who lived behind walls with 1,000 attendants, almost never appeared in public, and spoke to the country through exactly one man. 100 kings who'd been killing each other for decades looked around and agreed the only person everyone could trust was a ghost whisperer none of them had met. Which tells you a lot about how much they trusted each other. Eventually, one family fights its way to the top of the pile, and they secure the job with the best move in monarchy. They announce they're descended from the sun goddess herself. You can overthrow a king, you can't overthrow the sun. That family takes the title of emperor, and that exact bloodline is still on the throne today, two-headed god of this entire story. Now, in the year 607, this little island monarchy sends a letter to China, the superpower next door. It opens with, "From the Son of Heaven in the land of the rising sun, to the Son of Heaven in the land of the setting sun." The Chinese emperor, ruler of 50 million people, reads a note from a place he considers a rounding error, implying that his sun is going down. He is furious. He tells his staff never to bring him rude, barbarian mail again. And Japan, having insulted the superpower to its face, immediately starts ordering everything off the superpower's menu. Writing, Buddhism, law codes, court ranks, city plans. They copy it all. Politely insult, warmly absorb. The two-faced thing starts early, is what I'm saying. And if you want the actual founding scene of Japanese politics, here it is. The year is 645, and the imperial court is holding a solemn ceremony. Letters from Korea are being read aloud before the empress. In the front row sits the most powerful man in Japan, a minister so feared and so paranoid that he's never seen without his sword. Except today. Today, a court entertainer, hired for precisely this purpose, has spent the morning sweet-talking him into handing the sword over. Just a bit of fun, sir. No blades at a ceremony. The palace gates are already locked. Two hired swordsmen are supposed to do the killing, and at the crucial moment, they freeze. Because murdering the most powerful man in Japan is a lot. So the 19-year-old prince who planned the whole thing lunges past them and does it himself, in front of the throne, mid-recitation. The empress stands up and silently leaves the room, which is the imperial way of saying this meeting is adjourned. A guest, disarmed with a smile, behind a locked door. Japan's political history opens with the exact move it will one day use on an entire ocean. Standing in the corner of that throne room is the prince's co-conspirator, and his descendants get the family name Fujiwara. The Fujiwara watch all that blood and conclude that knives are inefficient. Their weapon will be daughters. Picture a baby. He's teething, he's drooling, he is the divine emperor of Japan. And the man bouncing him on his knee is his grandfather, who is also his regent, who is also the head of the Fujiwara family, who is, therefore, Japan. The moment the baby grows old enough to have opinions, he'll be lovingly retired and swapped for a fresher baby with a Fujiwara mother. They run this scam for 2 centuries, generation after generation, without drawing a sword once. Why stab a dynasty when you can babysit it? And the court they preside over in Kyoto becomes the most exquisitely useless ruling class in history. Careers rise and fall on poetry, on handwriting, on whether your 12-layered sleeves match the season. A bored noblewoman in this scene writes what's arguably the world's first novel, and its hero's great talents are seduction and weeping beautifully. Gorgeous people, zero governance. Because out in the actual country, mud and rice Japan, there are no police and no army worth the name. And everyone with land is hiring private muscle. The nobles hire warriors to squeeze taxes out of villages. The villages hire warriors to keep the taxmen out. Same job market, both ends. That muscle drills, organizes, intermarries, and hardens into a warrior class with its own code and its own ambitions, the samurai. And when the perfumed court finally has a succession crisis, both factions invite samurai clans into the capital to settle it. The moment the dogs are asked to referee the masters are done. 2 great clans come out on top and then turn on each other. And after 5 years of war, the Minamoto clan wins the country. Their leader, Yoritomo, is a cold, careful man, and the war was largely won for him by his kid brother, a battlefield prodigy so brilliant and so beloved, he becomes the most famous person in Japan. So, naturally, Yoritomo has him hunted to death. The brother flees north and shelters with an old warlord who swore on his honor to protect him. Then the old man dies, and his son does the math, betrays the houseguest, and ships his head to Yoritomo preserved in sweet sake. Yoritomo accepts the head with full courtesy. Then he annihilates the family that sent it, on the logic that men who break their father's oath once will break yours next. The lesson of the new era is simple. The handshake is the weapon. Yoritomo doesn't bother taking the throne either. He leaves the divine emperor in Kyoto, waving, and rules from his own military headquarters 300 miles away with the title of shogun. The god out front, the soldier in the back office. Japan will run on this arrangement for 700 years. It takes 1 generation for the back office to get backstabbed. Yoritomo dies, allegedly falling off a horse, and his widow's family, the Hojo, step in to help his young heirs. Helping looks like this. The first son is deposed and quietly murdered. The second son walks down the snowy stone steps of a shrine one winter night after a ceremony, and his own nephew bursts from beside the staircase and takes his head off, shouting that he's avenged his father. The nephew is executed before sunrise, which conveniently makes the dynasty extinct. The clan that conquered all Japan lasted exactly 1 generation, wiped out at family gatherings. And the in-laws, who'd been managing everyone's affairs while this happened, look around the suspiciously empty room and graciously agree to keep managing. They import replacement shoguns from Kyoto, toddlers, ideally. Toddlers don't ask questions. That's the government. A regent ruling for a puppet shogun, ruling for a puppet emperor. When the largest empire in human history calls. Kublai Khan has conquered China. Half of Asia pays him tribute, and he sends Japan letter after letter suggesting they join the family before something unfortunate happens. Japan's foreign policy response is to leave the most powerful man alive on red. So, in 1274, the Mongols land, with tactics and exploding bombs the samurai have never seen. and day one goes badly for Japan, and the invaders pull back to their ships for the night. That night, a storm wrecks the fleet. The Khan, reasonably, calls it weather and sends fresh envoys to ask if Japan is ready to talk now. Japan marches the envoys to a beach and beheads them. As diplomatic answers go, that one's hard to misread. So in 1281, he sends one of the biggest invasion fleets of the pre-modern world, well over 100,000 men. Japan, which has spent 7 years building a wall along the landing beaches, holds on by its fingernails for weeks. And then a typhoon shows up and deletes that fleet too. 2 invasions, 2 hurricanes, on demand. Japan reached the only available conclusion, that the gods themselves had intervened and named the storms the divine wind. In Japanese, kamikaze. The word will be back. The hilarious part is that winning broke them. You pay samurai with the loser's land, and the loser's land is on the sea floor. Thousands of warriors mortgaged everything for the war effort, lined up for payment, and found the treasury empty. So when an ambitious emperor rebels against the bankrupt regime, the regime sends its very best general to crush him. The general marches his army halfway there, has a think, turns around, and destroys the government that sent him. The regime is killed by its own rescue party. 3 years later, that same general, now running the country, decides the emperor he just liberated has too many opinions, drives him out of the capital, and installs a more agreeable emperor instead. The first one sets up a rival court in the mountains. So now Japan has 2 living sun gods at the same time, each calling the other a fraud, for 60 years. Theologians hated this one weird trick. From there, the country just keeps delaminating. The shoguns weaken, the provincial governors stop sending taxes and start acting like kings. In 1467, a succession spat inside the shogun's own house ignites a war that burns the capital to the ground for 11 years and settles absolutely nothing. After that, there's no country left to speak of, just 150 warlords in a knife fight that lasts over a century. The era gets a polite textbook name, the Warring States. The phrase people living in it used translates as, "The low overthrow the high." Your bodyguard wants your castle. Your son wants your castle. The man pouring your tea might be a ninja, who in real life is less magic shadow wizard and more freelance arsonist with excellent references. Vassals topple lords so routinely, it's practically a career path. The whole country is the throne room from 645 on a loop for 130 years. Into this knife fight, in 1543, drifts a storm-blown Portuguese ship, the first Europeans ever to reach Japan. And they step ashore carrying a product no one there has seen: the gun. The warlords take one look and lose their minds. Within about a decade, Japan has manufactured an estimated 300,000 of them. Because if you give the most over-militarized society on Earth a new toy, they don't adopt it, they industrialize it. By the end of the century, Japan likely has more guns than all of Europe. The Portuguese also unpack Christianity, which spreads impressively fast, helped along by the detail that converted lords get first access to the gun shipments. Salvation sold separately, ammunition included. 3 men end the chaos, one after another, and Japan itself summed them up in a little poem about a songbird that refuses to sing. The first man says, "If it won't sing, kill it." The second says, "If it won't sing, I'll make it want to sing." The third says, "If it won't sing, I'll wait." The kill it guy is Oda Nobunaga, a minor lord written off as an idiot, right up until an army 10 times his size invades his land. He waits for a screaming thunderstorm, marches his tiny force through it, and falls on the enemy camp while its commander is celebrating early victories with sake. The man's head is off before the rain stops. That's the announcement. Nobunaga then spends 20 years shredding everything old Japan holds sacred: He arms peasants with massed volley-fire guns and mows down the most feared samurai cavalry in the land. Warrior monks defy him, so he burns their sacred mountain, monasteries and all. By 1582, the country is nearly his. And then, one June night, sleeping in a Kyoto temple with 30 guards because who would dare, he wakes to noise in the courtyard and assumes some soldiers are brawling. Then he sees the banners. They belong to his most trusted general. No demands, no negotiation, just his own army pointed at him. Nobunaga reportedly shrugs, says there's no way around it, fights in his nightclothes with a bow until the temple is burning around him, and walks into the fire so nobody gets a trophy. They never find the body. The conqueror of Japan, undone the most Japanese way possible, by his own org chart. The traitor gets 13 days. Because Nobunaga's best commander hears the news, abandons the siege he's running, and force marches his army 200 kilometers in about a week, which, in June, in armor, is a cardio miracle. He wipes the traitor out before he's finished redecorating. This Avenger is the make-it-want-to-sing guy, Hideyoshi, and his resume is genuinely impossible. Born a peasant, no surname, he entered Nobunaga's service carrying the man's sandals, and the boss nicknamed him Monkey. Sandal duty to ruler of Japan in one lifetime, on pure charm, bribery, and scheming, the greatest social climb in the country's history. Mind you, he avenges his dead boss and then smoothly shoulders aside his dead boss's actual heirs, because gratitude is a ladder like anything else. And once he's on top, history's ultimate climber makes his signature move. He burns the ladder. Nationwide sword hunt, every peasant weapon confiscated, classes frozen by law, farmers farm, samurai fight, nobody moves. The man who went from rice paddy to palace makes it illegal to ever do what he did. Then, with Japan unified and his enormous veteran army suddenly unemployed, Hideyoshi decides to conquer China through Korea, which goes the way invading both at once goes. 6 years of meat grinder, nothing gained, and the armies of nearly every great lord in Japan come home bled white. Nearly every lord. The wait-and-see guy, Tokugawa-era, spent the entire catastrophe at home, regretfully unable to attend, keeping his forces fat and rested. When Hideyoshi dies, leaving a 5-year-old heir, everyone in Japan can do that arithmetic. The country splits in two and meets in the year 1600 at a foggy mountain crossroads called Sekigahara, possibly the biggest samurai battle ever fought. And Ieyasu walks in outnumbered. He's also already won, because he's spent months writing secret letters into the enemy's ranks. Mid-battle, on a hill with a perfect view, an entire allied army of 15,000 men stands motionless for hours, ignoring its own side's increasingly desperate signals, and then charges downhill into its allies. Pre-purchased. The battle's done by mid-afternoon, a century and a half of treachery settled by one final bulk order of it. But Ieyasu's masterpiece comes later, and it's the most beautiful Khan in Japanese history. He's in his 70s. One loose end remains, his old boss Hideyoshi's son, grown now, sitting in Osaka Castle, the mightiest fortress in Japan, ringed by double moats and garrisoned by every masterless samurai with a grudge. Ieyasu has sworn repeatedly on his honor to protect this young man. So he needs a pretext, and he finds one inside a bell. The young man funds a temple. The temple casts a great bronze bell. The bell carries a standard blessing for peace, and Ieyasu's scholars discover that 2 characters in the inscription, if you squint with intent, split the characters of Ieyasu's name in half. A bell. This is declared a curse and grounds for war. The winter siege goes nowhere. The fortress is simply too strong. So Ieyasu offers peace on weirdly generous terms. The boy keeps his castle, his lands, his men. There's just one friendly clause. As a gesture of mutual goodwill, the outer moat will be filled in. Ieyasu's men arrive with shovels and work with alarming enthusiasm. And somehow, also fill in the inner moats. And by the time anyone formally objects, the greatest fortress in Japan is a building with a lawn. Ieyasu comes back that summer. The castle burns, the Toyotomi line is exterminated, and the handshake then stab gets its domestic masterclass. The bell, by the way, still exists. You can visit it. It did nothing wrong. Having out-betrayed everyone alive, the Tokugawa build a state designed around one principle, that nobody in Japan can ever be trusted again. And weirdly, it's the formula for total peace. Every lord in the country must live in the shogun's capital every other year, and when he goes home, his wife and heir stay behind as permanent guests, which is the polite word for hostages. The annual commute, hundreds of retainers in mandatory splendor, quietly bankrupts him, so the money that might fund a rebellion funds parade costumes instead. Rebellion isn't forbidden, it's priced out. And the outside world gets the same treatment as the lords. Christianity is banned, then exterminated. In 1639, the country seals itself shut, no one in, no one out, on pain of death. One exception, the Dutch, who convinced the shogun they only wanted money, not souls, and who get confined to a tiny, fan-shaped artificial island in Nagasaki Harbor. One island, the size of a few city blocks. For 2 centuries, that's Japan's entire window on the West. And inside the sealed box, something nobody predicted. 250 years of zero war. The population doubles toward 30 million. The shogun's city grows into possibly the biggest on earth. The samurai, with no one to fight, decay into salaried clerks with 2 swords and crushing debt. The merchants, officially the gutter class, end up holding all the actual money and spend it inventing nearly everything you picture when you picture old Japan. Kabuki, woodblock prints, sushi as street food, geisha districts. And through the Dutch keyhole, a tiny underground of obsessives keeps smuggling European books, teaching themselves anatomy and astronomy and ballistics from a language no one around them speaks, just in case the outside world ever shows up again. It shows up in 1853, black and smoking. 4 American warships steam into the bay outside the capital, 2 of them moving against the wind with no sails, which to the crowds on shore is roughly a UFO sighting. Commodore Matthew Perry hands over a letter from the US president that is, beneath the courtesies, "Open your ports or we'll be back." He comes back with more ships. The shogunate's antique coastal guns can't argue, and Japan signs. Then keeps signing. Foreigners get their own judges on Japanese soil. Tariffs get set by foreigners. The full, unequal treaty package. The same menu, just served to China, whose recent beating by Britain every Japanese official has read about in horror. The shogun's one job for 2.5 centuries was keeping the barbarians out. The barbarians are in, and they didn't fire a shot. The country convulses. Furious samurai start cutting down officials and foreigners in the streets under the slogan, "Revere the Emperor, expel the barbarians." And catch that first part, because after 7 centuries of decorative waving, the forgotten god in Kyoto is suddenly the hottest property in Japan. Everyone who hates the shogun needs a flag, and there's no flag like a living descendant of the sun. 2 samurai domains in the far south, ancient rivals who hate each other almost as much as they hate the shogun, sign a secret midnight alliance, buy modern rifles through back channels, and march. The last shogun reads the room, hands in his resignation, surrenders his castle peacefully, and they attack his supporters anyway, because you don't waste a perfectly good revolution on a graceful exit. In 1868, the rebels proclaim the emperor restored to power. He's 15. The men crowding around the throne will run Japan for the next 40 years. The sign on the door changes. The back office stays the back office. What that back office does next, though, is one of the wildest sprints in human history. They look at the West, conclude that the only way to avoid being eaten is to become the same species of predator within 1 generation. And just do it. Domains abolished. The samurai class itself abolished. Swords banned. Top knots off. 1,000 years of warrior aristocracy deleted by memo. Railways, telegraphs, factories, a conscript army of farm boys with rifles. At one point, the new government packs half its own senior leadership onto a ship for a 2-year world tour to study how Western power actually works. That's a startup sending half the founders to live inside a competitor's office. The samurai who object to being deleted rise one last time in 1877, and the rebellion dies the most symbolic death imaginable. Sword cavalry charging conscript artillery. You've seen the Tom Cruise movie about it. The farm boys win. And then comes graduation day, 1876. Japanese warships sail into a Korean harbor, uninvited, guns run out, and force an unequal treaty on a country that wants to be left alone. It is Perry's script, performed beat for beat, 23 years after Japan sat in the audience. Most countries that get bullied write sad poetry about it. Japan took notes. The new empire moves fast and shakes every hand in sight. It crushes China in a war over Korea in 1895 to the world's astonishment, and takes Taiwan. When Korea's queen starts leaning toward Russia for protection, Japanese agents break into her palace before dawn and murder her. In 1902, Japan signs an alliance with Britain, the superpower itself, as an equal partner, first non-Western nation to manage it. And in 1904, it picks a fight with Russia, an empire 60 times its size, and opens that fight on a February night when Japanese destroyers glide into the Russian naval anchorage and torpedo the fleet at its moorings. The declaration of war is delivered afterward. Strike first, paperwork later. The Handshake special, now playing internationally. Russia's response is to send its Baltic fleet steaming around the entire planet, Africa and all, an 8-month voyage so cursed it deserves its own video. A few weeks in, off the coast of England, the jittery Russian gunners open fire in the dark on what they're certain are Japanese torpedo boats. They are British fishing trawlers. In the North Sea, Russia nearly adds a war with Britain to its calendar before sighting a single Japanese ship. And when the exhausted armada finally drags itself into Japanese waters, it's annihilated in an afternoon. Dozens of warships reduced to a handful of survivors. For the first time in the modern age, an Asian nation has beaten a European great power, and every colonized people on the planet sits up at the same time. Korea doesn't get to celebrate. Over the next 5 years, Japan walks it through a friendship treaty, then a protection treaty, then takes its diplomacy, then its army, then its throne. 5 polite documents, and in 1910, the country is simply gone, absorbed, with decades of brutal rule to follow. Every signature collected at gunpoint, every gunpoint called partnership. World War I. Japan plays on easy mode, joining the Allies and scooping up Germany's Pacific colonies at clearance prices. It ends the war at the victor's table at Versailles, a certified great power, and proposes adding a single sentence to the peace, that nations should treat each other's peoples equally, regardless of race. A majority votes yes. The American president, chairing, rules it needs to be unanimous, and kills it. Japan files that away in the grudge ledger, in ink. Because back home, the machine is slipping its leash. The old founders die off. The new emperor is held too sacred to decide anything. The politicians are despised. And the army, which on paper answers only to the sacred non-decider, works out that it can simply do things. In 1931, Japanese officers in Manchuria plant a bomb on their own railway, blame Chinese saboteurs, and conquer a territory bigger than France and Germany combined. The civilian government in Tokyo learns parts of this from the newspapers. The League of Nations investigates, concludes the obvious, and Japan's delegation rises mid-session, walks out of the League, and never comes back. The conquered land is dressed up as an independent country, with the deposed last emperor of China hired to sit on its throne and wave. At home, politicians who push back get shot at breakfast by young officers the courts treat as misunderstood patriots. One prime minister, staring down their pistols, offers to talk it over. Dialogue is useless, they reply, and fire. Ask who's actually steering Japan in 1936, and there's no answer. The car is moving, and the men grabbing for the wheel keep getting thrown from the vehicle. In 1937, a manufactured skirmish near Beijing tips it all the way over into full invasion of China. And the jokes stop here for a minute. When the army took the Chinese capital that winter, it spent weeks massacring prisoners and civilians on a scale measured in the hundreds of thousands. It stands among the worst atrocities of a century, with no shortage of candidates, and it poisons Japan's name in Asia to this day. And for all that horror, China refuses to fold. The promised 3-month war swallows years, millions of men, and most of the empire's fuel and steel, with no end anywhere in sight. Washington, watching, starts closing taps. And the taps are everything, because Imperial Japan imports nearly all of what it runs on, including 4/5 of its oil from the United States. In 1941, the oil stops completely. Tokyo's planners now stare at a literal fuel gauge, 2 years of Navy oil left, and a menu of 2 options. Back out of China, which the army would sooner die than do, or seize the oil-rich European colonies of Southeast Asia, which means war with America. So they game it out, grab everything fast, smash the US Pacific Fleet in one surprise blow so it can't interfere, fortify the ocean, and bet that a soft, divided democracy won't bleed for years to take it all back. Every assumption in that plan is wrong, and it ships anyway. So, a quiet Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941. The eggs, the planes, the red circles. The diplomats in Washington, still smiling, still officially negotiating, while the torpedoes are already in the water, the breakup note running an hour late because the embassy staff couldn't decode and type it fast enough. The oldest move in the national playbook, executed flawlessly at the biggest possible scale. And it's perfect, tactically. Battleship Row is wrecked in 90 minutes. Strategically, it is the worst decision in Japanese history, because the one thing on Earth that could weld isolationist America into a single roaring war machine overnight was precisely this. Japan didn't knock America out of the Pacific. It woke the largest industrial economy ever assembled and handed it a grudge. For 6 months, you'd never know it. Japan runs the table. The Philippines, Hong Kong, Malaya, Burma, the Dutch East Indies. Singapore, Britain's impregnable fortress of the East, falls in a week. Then, in April 1942, 16 American bombers appear out of nowhere over Tokyo itself. As a raid, it's a pinprick. As a message, it detonates, because the High Command had promised the homeland was untouchable. Stung, Japan rushes its grand trap to lure out and sink the American carriers at Midway. One problem: the Americans have cracked the Japanese naval codes and are reading the trap's invitations in advance. The Navy that opened 4 straight wars by ambush sails into the biggest ambush in Pacific history and loses 4 aircraft carriers in a single day. The surprisers surprised. After Midway, the math takes over, and the math is American. For every shipyard Japan has, America has a dozen. The empire starts losing islands the way a tide goes out. By 1945, it's apocalyptic. American bombers burn Japanese cities almost unopposed, and one March night in Tokyo, the firestorm kills around 100,000 people, more than either atomic bomb will. Okinawa takes 3 months of fighting so obscene that American planners price an invasion of the home islands in the millions of casualties. Japan's answer is a word from 700 years ago: kamikaze. The divine wind that twice saved the islands from the Mongols, reissued as thousands of young men flown into the sides of ships, on the theory that the miracle weather could be manufactured out of pilots. It can't. And through that final summer, Tokyo is clinging to exactly one hope. And the hope is Moscow. Japan and the Soviet Union have a signed neutrality pact, so the plan is to beg Stalin to broker a gentle peace. And all summer, Japanese diplomats press Moscow. And Moscow replies with the warmest, most encouraging nothing. Stalin is stalling. At Yalta, months earlier, he promised the Allies he'd attack Japan 3 months after Germany fell. And Germany fell on May 8th. Do that math with me. August 6th. Hiroshima vanishes under the first atomic bomb. August 8th, right on schedule, the one country Japan was begging for help declares war, and 1.5 million Soviet soldiers crash into Manchuria. August 9th, Nagasaki. The empire that opened 4 wars mid-handshake ends with someone else's hand on its shoulder and a knife between its ribs. And you will not find a cleaner punchline anywhere in history. The cabinet deadlocks on surrender, 3-4, 3 against, and the tiebreak falls, for the first time in living memory, to the sacred man whose entire job was never deciding anything. The emperor says, "End it." That night, true to form to the very last second, army officers storm the palace to steal the surrender recording before it can air. They ransack the building in the dark, miss the disc hidden in a pile of documents, and fizzle by dawn. Japan's final act of the war is an attempted backstab on its own surrender. At noon on August 15th, the broadcast goes out, and 100 million people freeze around their radios, because no ordinary citizen has ever heard the emperor's voice. The voice of the living God turns out to be thin and careful, speaking court language so archaic millions can't follow it. And it delivers possibly history's greatest understatement, that the war has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. What follows is the strangest occupation ever staged. An American general rules Japan, politely, through the same emperor, who goes back on the radio that New Year's to clarify that he is not, in fact, divine. There's a photo from that autumn. The general in open-collar khakis, hands on hips, towering beside the emperor in formal mourning dress, and the picture needs no caption. The empire is dissolved, the army abolished, and the new constitution renounces war itself, forever, in writing. You'd expect the story to end there, in the ashes. Instead, Japan pulls off the most shocking pivot in this entire video. When war breaks out next door in Korea in 1950, Japan becomes the factory, depot, and repair shop for the UN war effort. And the orders jolt the dead economy back to life, the neighbors' war bankrolling the recovery. The country reroutes everything, all that discipline, all that intensity, into one channel: build. In 1954, it processes the bomb the only way it can, by putting it in a rubber lizard suit and filming it stomping Tokyo flat. You know him. By 1964, Tokyo is hosting the Olympics, and days before the opening ceremony, Japan unveils the world's first bullet train, 19 years after the firebombing, faster than anything on rails anywhere on Earth. By 1968, the country that was radioactive rubble 23 years earlier is the second largest economy in the capitalist world. By the 80s, its cars and electronics have conquered the markets of every nation that defeated it. No torpedoes required. The boom inflates until the grounds of the Imperial Palace are notionally worth more than all the land in California. Then, the bubble does what bubbles do, and Japan spends a couple of long gray decades paying it off, settling into the calm, wealthy, slightly time-bent country you know. And the country you know is the punchline. Modern Japan is, by nearly every measure, the politest, safest, most trustworthy society on the planet. Rail companies issue formal apologies for trains that leave 20 seconds early. Lost wallets come home with the cash still inside. 2,000 years of perfecting the smiling knife, one catastrophic graduation project, and the world's most practiced backstabber turned around and became the friend who walks you to your door. People change. Nations change. It's honestly beautiful. Just, if you're ever at a ceremony in Japan and a charming entertainer offers to hold your sword for a minute, keep the sword.